Hi, everyone. Welcome to Journey of the Unordinary, a podcast where we will carry out intimate conversations with our guests to learn about their journeys to where they are today. In each episode, we'll cover where they grew up, what are some pivotal moments in their life, and their approach in life in general. I'm Jackie, a Chinese-born New York City living girl who's perpetually on a hunt for her childhood hometown food from Kunming.
And I'm Chuxing, a Chinese-born Sydney living girl who loves exploring life and making meaningful connections. In this season, we bring you 10 episodes of 10 guests centered around tech and data. Join us to uncover their unique paths of these beautiful, unordinary people. Find a piece of yourself in their stories and let their adventure inspire your own.
Welcome to our fifth episode of Journey of the Unordinary. Today, we're super excited to have our first ever designer guest, Kathy, and another girl here with us today.
So I have been following Kathy long time ago before she knew me of her designs and digital art. And when she joined OP Labs, I was like really excited because I'm like, oh wow, I'm finally gonna work with someone that I've been following for a long time. So welcome, Kathy. And before we dive into the conversation, can you briefly introduce yourself to our guests?
Yes, sure. My name's Kathy. I am a designer, and recently, I guess, kind of recently, I joined OP Labs. It's my first stint in crypto and in Web3. Um, and before that, I was a designer at GitHub for 6 years. And before that, I was a designer at Patreon for about a year and a half. So I kind of viewed my um, new adventure in Web3 as just a continuation of this interest that I've had in supporting the creative community and open source builders throughout my tech career.
Before we dive into the career type of conversation, maybe you can also tell us like a little bit more about yourself, like where did you grow up? What is your kind of life journey or geolocation journey looking like? Yeah.
Yeah, I guess if you want the super summary TLDR, I was born in the U.S. and from about 3 to 6, I was living in China. I was raised by my grandparents in Fuzhou, as you know, and by the time I was 7, so I guess first grade, I moved back into the US, and I've basically been in the Bay Area in California ever since. I think other than those couple years in China, I've never lived anywhere else. So I grew up in a place of tech, even though I think when I was young, I was very oblivious to it. Um, and I ended up in my current, well, my only career really. I've never had another kind of job. I ended up in my design profession because, well, I went to college for toxicology because I thought that's what I wanted to do. I thought that was the impact that I wanted to have on the world. Was to, like, I don't know, be isolating different compounds and figuring out isotopes where they wouldn't be harmful to humans. Like, I thought it was super cool, and it was also the only thing I knew. Uh, like, it was the only alternate path that I knew about where you can pursue science but not be a doctor. I had the very stereotypical upbringing where parents are like, you should be a lawyer or a doctor, right? So, anyways, I went to Berkeley for studying toxicology, and at the end of my third year, I kind of had like a little mini crisis because I realized I had no real world skills. I wasn't doing super hot in school. And I just went kind of back in my memory and thought, well, I always like building websites for my Neopets. So seems like that's a job now. So I'm going to just pull all my effort into trying to get a job in design, making websites. And I was very lucky and landed an internship right before I graduated. So that's how I ended up where I am now, I guess, in my professional circumstances.
Wow, that's so cool. Like toxicology and isotopes. I'm
Yeah.
curious.
It has like nothing to do with my life now. Like I wouldn't even say that I know that much about it because I did so poorly in college.
Everything is connected. I'm sure, like maybe in your design, you're like, oh, this is like how chemicals react to each other. Let me do something in art that also similarly does that. I was gonna ask, like, how. So you said you grew up like in a place of tech without knowing it. So
hmm
why, when you went into kind of choosing an alternative path that's not doctor or not lawyer, why is it tech psychology? Like, did you ever consider, like software engineer, like those type of like really tech related, or like product management, that sort of, I guess, studying?
Yeah. I don't know. I think, I don't really know how aware kids of my age, like are, when they're 16, 17, how aware they are of different life paths that they can take. Both of my parents worked in tech, and have worked in tech for several decades at this point, but I was never interested in what they were doing. I never asked questions about their job. I knew that my dad was an engineer, and that he was good at it, but I had no interest, in his work and in the companies that he worked with beyond when they had parties and I got to go and get free t-shirts and stuff. That was sort of my relationship with tech, was job fairs. They used to have those, where you get free keychains and random gizmos with company brands on them. Um, and so, yeah, I just never had like a real curiosity for it, even though I was sort of interacting with technology through my childhood, through video games and exploring the internet. I kind of, came of age during an era where that was like the first generation to be communicating to each other through email as if it was texting. And yeah, I just never re-explored it, until I think I had that crisis in college where I really wanted to be able to get a job and felt that I had no options if I didn't change something about how I was spending my time. Third year in college, if you're studying science and you're not doing well, there's not that many paths for you. Like most scientific fields, I feel you have to keep pursuing an academic path, or you go to med school or something. um, and with the level of life experience and academic experience I had at that time, like my only option would have been to be a lab technician, I think. If even that, just because my grades were quite poor, so I don't think that even that was a possibility. um, so to me, the connection back to tech, I think, uh, perhaps it would have happened regardless of where I grew up. The thing that was important in my life path to get back into tech, or to pursue tech as a profession, was really, me being introduced to, I think, Pokemon, as through the world of video games, and then Neopets. I spent so much time on Neopets, so I think those two things gave me, um, the early childhood like love and passion and nostalgia that came and resurfaced when I was looking for a way out of my current life circumstances.
Yeah, I can. Jackie, and for our audience, if you don't know, you can totally tell how much Kathy likes Pokemon just from her name. Kathy, do you want to just like tell people what the meaning of your like Twitter handle and the handles that you use everywhere? Like, what's the meaning of that?
Yeah, my handle is Pifafu, and um, some people might say Pifafu, but it's really just Pikachu with the K and the CH replaced with Fs. And I got this handle because, the it's actually not a super short story, but the short version is, in college, my first roommate in college, she was a really serious Super Smash Brothers gamer. Like she was ranked in melee competitions and she played Super Smash like every single day in college, and I played a lot of that game with her, and loved playing Pikachu. And you can have a little game tag in that game, so I started to make my own game tag Pifafu because I wanted a name that represented the version of Pikachu I most loved, which was the very early Pikachu when when Pokemon was first introduced to the world. Pikachu was like almost a ball. He didn't really have like that much neck between his body and his head. And if you look at the earliest designs from like 25 years ago and you compare them to the modern Pikachu, he's like lengthened quite a bit. So the FAF in Pifafu stands for fat as fuck. So that's where the handle comes from. And the reason it stuck around is during my time at GitHub, I mentioned I worked there for 6 years. GitHub had a very cool remote culture and was very online, and it was like this distributed asynchronous organization before remote work was more common, post COVID. And people kind of called each other by their usernames, like as commonly as you might call somebody by their actual name. So after a couple of years there, people were calling me Piff and Peef and Pifafu, and not my actual name. So I just kind of stuck with that, and that's what I'm doing at OP Labs now.
Going back to not might not be as a child, you probably like wouldn't question like, oh, like what am I good at, what am I interested at? But looking back, um now, what do you think you were really curious about as a child slash what you were really good at as a child in retrospective?
Yeah. So the second question is very easy. I knew growing up that I was good at drawing. And this is because it was just something that was constantly reinforced by people around me. When I was in China, some of my earliest memories there are of my cousin who I really admired. He's like 8 years older than me, but I was 3 or 4 at the time. So he's like 12, and I would just follow him around everywhere, and he would draw and we would draw together. So when I came back to the US, I would spend a lot of time doodling. And once I was in elementary school and doodling in elementary school, teachers and classmates would say, "Oh, you're so good at drawing whatever." And guess what I was drawing? I was drawing Pokemon and Sailor Moon and whatever. So yeah, if you constantly hear that from adults and your peers, you even if it's not something I would have thought on my own, I knew that that was definitely a perception. So I knew that I was good at drawing, and I felt that I had a talent for that. In terms of my interests, that was something that I think took me a very, very long time to feel that I had a good grip on. The thing that I knew as a kid that I was always interested in, but couldn't really connect back into my everyday life was I just loved learning about animals. I grew up spending a ton of time in front of the television. If I wasn't watching cartoons, I was watching Animal Planet, like Planet Earth type of shows where it's all about following animals around in the savannah. I love the Crap Brothers, so I spent a lot of time just watching nature shows. And now that I'm older, I think that the connection back to all my other interests is really like, okay, well, it makes sense that I like things like Pokemon because it's just a different, you know, structure really to interact with something like an animal. And same thing with all the other interests that I had as a kid, like Tamagotchi, Neopets, Digimon, like they're all just animal kingdoms. So uh, yeah, and I think that through my love of drawing and doodling, that's where I, as an adult, realized that something that I really enjoy and that I will always probably enjoy in my life is to make things. And it could be, of any scale. It could be just a small doodle, like on a post-it note, or it could be something large, like work that you ship, software that you ship that impacts millions. But yeah, I just love making things.
Yeah, I think some people might find it like a luxury if you can actually combine your interest or your hobby and your career as well. Um, I think for example, like some people might say, oh, if I turn my hobby into a career, then I'll lose interest in that hobby. What do you think about that, Kathy?
Uh, yeah, I know that is something that people say a lot of, and I think that um, for me with design, I have had a changing perspective on it. I think when I was first in college, when I was having my little college crisis and started to um, work really hard to try to get a foot in the door and get a design job, I was telling myself, this I'm choosing this path because I can imagine myself doing a design job for the rest of my life. Like, I don't think I'll get tired of it. I really love moving boxes around in Photoshop, which is that's like what we were doing at the time. Um, and I never had that sort of conversation with myself about drawing because I never thought that I would pursue illustration as a full-time job. It's not something that I've tried to turn into a career, so I've only really in my early 20s thought about it for web design. And I think for the first 6 years, I felt that way where I was like, I don't think I'll get tired of it. I can feel myself improving and learning, and that was very motivating. And I did get to a point in my career while I was at GitHub where I felt like the job had lost its luster. And I kind of went through this brief period of maybe a year and a half or so where I wondered if it was a job that I would continue doing. Like, I didn't know if I would feel interested in it again if I changed tech companies or changed the type of problems that I was solving for. It's just that I had been doing it for almost 10 years at that point. Um, and so I started to take up pottery, and then eventually I ended up at OP Labs because um there was a person that I really enjoyed working with at GitHub who left GitHub to go to OP Labs. And um I wasn't like very passionate about design at that point, I would say, but I was very, very passionate about working with people that I liked. And because I was in this funk of not really knowing if I wanted to um keep committing to design, and that if I would have like many more years in the tech industry under that job, I decided, well, I know I like working with that person, so I'm just going to follow them. And once I was at OP Labs, I think that I really fell in love with design in a very different way. It was kind of like, okay, I had a certain relationship with that career during my 20s because I was young and I've never done it before. And it was all about growing and doing a lot of things for the very first time. And in my early 30s, which I'm still in the middle of, it's now a lot about, seeing those areas where I haven't really had the space or time to invest in that I know I'm still weak in. And I'm now trying to invest in that in myself. And I'm also facing like totally new challenges because Web3 is just different. um, and returning to a startup when I feel like I have a handle on my experience is also very different because when I was at Patreon, it was a startup and I was the first designer there, but I didn't know what I was doing. I was like just making everything up. And I wasn't getting that much better, I would say, because there weren't other designers around me. It was just me making stuff up and not knowing if it was good or not. And now that I'm experienced, there's a lot of things that I'm doing for the first time as well at OP Labs. Um, but I now know how to like identify my own weak spots, and I know how to find ways to improve or find people that can help me improve. Um, and yeah, I don't know. I think that it's always going to ebb and flow. But what I've learned is that what tires me out isn't the career, it's really just the context and whether you feel like you're being utilized to your fullest potential. I think that while I was at GitHub, I became bored over time because um, I was doing the same thing over and over again, just in slightly different contexts. But at OP Labs, I'm I'm really having new challenges, and I am stretching myself beyond my potential a lot of the time. And I think that keeps the job interesting. And it also shows me things that I can dramatically improve in, that I actually can try to improve in on the job, which at GitHub wasn't possible. So, yeah, that's a very long, kind of long-winded answer to your question. I think the takeaway really is, I think if you turn something you're passionate about, or deeply interested in into a career, you have to find circumstances that protect the things that you most value about that thing. And if you can identify what those things are and find environments where those things are protected, or you had advocacy for being able to focus on those things, then it should be fine. But I think everyone is different, right? Everyone values different things.
I love how introspective you are, and that's like a great summary. Just, try to the context, try to know why you like this hobby that you like, and then keep like turning the hobby in its purest format in like work setting as much as possible.
Hmm.
Um, and I want to dig a little deeper in the designer journey space. So you said you started with Patreon and then spent quite a few years at GitHub and then now at OP Labs.
Hmm.
Um, so the question is really broad, just like maybe I want to just really learn more about the designer journey from like the Patreon years where you were like, oh, I'm like interested in this space, but I don't quite have that much experience. Or, like moving on to GitHub, you have maybe the toughest moment, proudest moment, biggest contribution you feel like you made for this open source project that like millions of people use. To maybe like nowadays, what are some like your designer routine or framework that you follow, whichever direction you want to take. Just want to know more about the designer journey you've been on for the past, I guess, more than a decade.
Yeah. So so when I the first internship I had outside of college, that was my very first design job. I was there for, I think, just a little bit over a year. Somebody took a chance on me. They saw my resume, slash cover letter, and I remember asking this person who ended up being my manager and mentor, and then close friend. um, I was like, why did you like give me the internship? Because I had no experience and my work wasn't very good. And he just said, oh, like when I read your cover letter and I met you, I felt that you were just so, you just had, I don't remember what the words he used was, but it was along the lines of, the young passion and like the bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, anything is possible sort of vibe, just because you're young and you really just want a chance. So he said that was why he uh, ended up giving me the internship, which turned into my first design job. And that that sort of I think I had that sort of attitude towards design for the first 2 years of my career, where I was just very excited to even be in that job. Felt incredibly fortunate to have had those opportunities, and was wanted to really get better because I knew that I sucked. I think I saw that Ira Glass quote. I don't know if it was like happened to go viral at the time or if it was always popular, but I remember somebody shared it with me, maybe from 99% Invisible podcast or something. And it's that famous quote of his where he says, like everything you make sucks because when you first start making it, your taste is just so much further along than where your ability is at. And I kind of just attached to that quote of his and wanted to see myself get better, wanted to see the gap between my ability and my taste get smaller. And so when I went to Patreon, that was actually a very like the way I ended up there was very peculiar. It was I was wanting to leave my internship because I was burning out there, and my manager like was really encouraging of me to apply to other jobs, and I ended up I didn't have much of a portfolio. I didn't really work on anything at that internship that turned into a real thing. And so I was on this site called 99designs.com, where it's just a bunch of clients who post a thing that they want, and then a bunch of people can submit designs, and it's just like a design for a free contest. And the only person um, who gets rewarded with any money is the winner of a contest. And so I was just like submitting designs to a bunch of these client briefs, not because I was trying to win the contract or win money, but because I just wanted practice on real things that people wanted. And one of those happened to be Patreon. Like, they had anonymously put up a prompt on this website for a web redesign, and I ended up submitting something. They ended up selecting my work, and we, after a couple feedback loops and other small projects, they ended up hiring me. And so I got my job at Patreon before I even really knew what they were. And at this point, Patreon was like 9 people, and they were still operating out of Jack Conte's apartment. So it was really, really early startup days. I think they might have just closed their Series A funding. Um, and for me, I think the super exciting thing was two things. One, I again felt very lucky to be able to get a job because I still felt like the same way I felt when I applied to the internship, which was I didn't really have much experience to show, and anyone that hired me, I felt like it was sort of a leap of faith situation. And so I was excited, one, that I got my foot in the door, and then two, I was just very excited to move to San Francisco. Like, I I it's not like I was very far from San Francisco for most of my life, but I regarded that as the place I wanted to end up, to, be able to learn more and become like a better designer and to live in a city. Um, so that's how I ended up at Patreon. And I think it was there that maybe it seeded my interest in designing for creators. I think it's like such a buzzword now. People say like the creative economy, blah, 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 blah. Patreon at that time was still a baby. I feel like the other big players were Kickstarter and GoFundMe. And so to me, it was very new. I was like 22, I think, at the time. And I was around all of these people who were extremely passionate, extremely dedicated to Patreon's mission. Like, they were all either creators themselves, or they were just extremely dedicated to Patreon as a company. And that kind of environment, it can be both good and bad, right? Like, when people are that motivated and that passionate and dedicated to a cause, and that cause happens to be executed through a corporation. So I worked very hard, and I burned out very quickly because I ended up caring a lot. Um, I was like, oh, we can't do these designs because you have to think about the way creators will feel if they see upsells in their feed and things like that. I was very young and naive, and I didn't really have any design mentorship. Um, so when I burned out, I think that was just due to, well, a lot of people at the company were uh, doing tech for the first time, and a lot of people were young. And so was I. And when I left, or when I decided I wanted to leave, it was because I felt that I really needed to find a place where I could be on a team of other designers. I finally saw that this was the big gap that I had, and something that I would need in order to truly get better. Um, and so when I was applying for jobs after a year and a half at Patreon, um, I was very lucky and got a job at GitHub. And to be honest, I applied there because on the job listing it said, remote work okay, and that was just like not a very common perk at the time. So I was like, well, I don't know what GitHub is. I know it's like a developer tool and developer platform. I don't feel like I'm equipped to do anything do any design for it because I really don't understand the product or the audience. But I'm gonna give it a shot because they say remote work okay. And I ended up getting the job, and I was very excited about it because during the interview loop, there was somebody similar to Chushin following me on Twitter. There was somebody that I was following on Twitter at the time who was, to me, like a really, really experienced designer that I would love to learn from and emulate. And he was like the hiring manager. So I was just like, oh well, if I join this join this company, then I'll get to work with Connor Sears. And then I also met Mark Otto, who I didn't know at the time, but he created Bootstrap. So, anyways, just really really cool vibe from this opportunity, and I ended up going to GitHub and then had like an amazing 6 years there. I didn't actually have any like remarkably bad experiences. It was largely like highly positive for me, actually.
Wow, that is so cool. Creating Bootstrap and like all these people. Very, very cool.
I kind of want to get into just a little bit more about like what you were mentioning about taste and ability, and also just like when you were mentioning your journey from Patreon to GitHub and then to OP. Oh, and even like at the very beginning about the internship, you mentioned a lot of things about being lucky, but I also think at the same time it's probably not just about pure luck, and I wonder like what can you tell whoever that wants to start their career as a designer, what can they learn from your journey as well? Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, that's a very I'm glad you said that because I think I will always feel lucky, but I know that it's not just luck, right? You do have to set yourself up for success. And for me at the time, that just meant okay, every day you're going to go on 99designs.com, find a bunch of client briefs that you might be able to do, and then do it. And so, in my last year of college, I spent almost all my time at this cafe called Asha, and I would go there every single day where I didn't have many classes, or I would skip most of my classes because you don't have to go. And then I would spend like 5 to 8 hours just like doing stuff in Photoshop, um, and so I was creating my own opportunity, right? Or trying to set myself up so that if the opportunity came, that I would be ready. And um and and I don't know, like the thing that I would tell people now, because this is how I ended up in design, and because I felt that it was just people taking a chance on me and seeing that I was passionate and deciding, okay, well, let's just give it a go and see if she can grow and learn. I always take calls with people who are looking to get into design, or if they feel stuck and they're early in their career and they just need advice. I always meet those people if they want to chat. um, and I think that that's really the main advice I would give, is that if this is something that you really want, uh, find ways to set yourself up. And sometimes that means finding somebody who's willing to mentor you or give you advice. And sometimes that means just like honing your craft. Maybe it's both. It's probably both. You got to both work on your craft and, find opportunities where people might be able to help you out. And yeah, I think that that would be my early career advice, is how much can you control and put your effort towards. And if you do feel stuck, maybe it's time to find somebody who can help you out. And in my case, it was, well, I need a design team now. I can't just keep looking at dribble and doing my best.
Uh, I just have another quick follow up. I'm not a designer, but I like the design and the art and the concept overall. What do you think that differentiates someone as a junior designer to like a staff or like a lead designer? And what I guess like what have you grown out of your 10 year of career? Like what is the like the intern version of Kathy versus the version of Kathy now? Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's like a very wide gap. I think that I don't know. I think in broad strokes, designers that are earlier in their career, or if they consider themselves junior, or if other people consider them junior. um I guess I think of it in two really broad categories. Like one category is your actual craft. Can you make things pop? Oh my gosh, design community, I feel like would hate that answer. Is one is your craft, like how good you are at the technical aspects of design. And depending on what kind of designer you are, that can mean different things. Product designers, I think, have to be able to place themselves in the circumstance of the audience that they're designing for, and they need to think through user flows, whereas some site designers might be like more invested in like the technical aspects of design. I think that these kind of foundations matter no matter what kind of job you have. But anyways, there's just one broad category of here are the technical skills and the baseline like requirements for the job. And then I think the other aspect, which is softer and fuzzier and becomes more and more important, I think, the more senior and experienced you are, is how you navigate people and navigate relationships. Because I think a junior designer or a junior IC in any function, like I think that a lot of their focus is learning and execution. So they are given these um, areas of work where they can explore and execute and potentially make mistakes within in order to grow themselves, right? um, and as you get better at your job, that area gets bigger and bigger. Your sandbox of the mess that you can make grows larger. um, and then I think as you transition into senior staff and like a leader, you are the one that helps define that sandbox for other people. And you also need to know, um, likely you're communicating more with people outside of the design function, so you need to understand how to frame the work that you're doing to somebody who may not have any design foundation or any knowledge of design. um, so I think that if you are developing both, uh, I think you need to develop both to be a very senior and or to be a very successful senior designer in the type of teams that I've worked on. Um, my main blind spot to stuff is like design agencies. I've never worked at an agency. I don't know how different it is. I only know it in broad strokes, but I feel that in corporations, one, you need to hone your craft, and two, you really need to care about the way that you navigate people, and invest in the softer aspects of the job.
Always, always. I think with any job we hear or observe a lot about like the people, the relationship is actually quite important as you grow more senior.
Mm-hmm.
But circling back to design, if you had to sum up or tell people what is a designer, what would you say?
Mm, hmm. I think that I think I would probably say that a designer is a creative problem solver. Um, and yeah, is that enough? I feel like it doesn't really say anything, because maybe you can say that about a lot of different jobs, but yeah, at the core, I think that that's what it is. And I think that that's why, um, well, maybe to extend it a little bit, a creative problem solver that utilizes design methodology. Um, and I know that explanation includes the word design, so maybe that's not good. But what I'm really trying to say is that, um, the way that designers solve problems is to follow this process in which you identify the problem and explore and go wide to explore solutions, and then you work collaboratively to iterate and uh, follow, you know based on the information you have, make a bunch of incremental decisions that lead to the final state of your work. And that's why I think that design is actually at the core of almost all functions in like a typical like corporation.
That's a beautiful answer. And just more context on why I wanted to ask you this question. Um, Coming from a coding background, for years I thought that, coding, you just like ship code and then it works, then it's fine. But when I think about something like design, I think I was very naive and very biased in that, like, oh, I'm like thinking about visualizations and like the website, actual things you see. But recently, as I start to work more with designers, precisely like what you say, it's really much, much, much more beyond just drawing or coming up with that visualization aspect. So yeah, like really, I think what you're saying about the design process makes a lot of sense, actually.
Yeah, I think that it's something that I started to forget until more recently when I took on a more explicit leadership role. I've only been a individual contributor for like my entire career until a couple months ago, where I decided, okay, I'm gonna be a manager now. And I'm thinking through, okay, how do I explain design to people who may never really have worked with design and aren't very familiar with that function, or how that function works? Because I think that it's very easy for organizations with limited experience with design to start to treat design as just that visual surface, as you mentioned, because design work is so visual. That's maybe the first thing people attach to, and then they interpret what they think that function does based on a pretty a pretty image or beautiful pixels and composition. And um and so yeah, I was remembering, okay, design function at its core is really designed by its process. The output is awesome, of course, and the output is what everyone wants, but the holy grail of design is actually the design process. And that's the thing that I think if design teams and design leaders are able to fold other people into, that's what would make a design function successful in any place, and would make a lot of other teams very successful because the design process is awesome.
Love it, and congrats being a manager.
Oh, thanks.
What made you want to transition from IC to manager, and what have you already observed that are different from being an IC to a manager?
Yeah, I really like this question just because it's kind of more recent in my life experience. Um, when I was a staff designer at GitHub, it was sort of implicit that acting and you were acting as a mentor for more junior designers, and that you would have more responsibility just because of your seniority and what you're being compensated and whatever. And so I had a little bit of experience being being responsible for some other designers in the capacity of a project, but not like responsible for other people in terms of their growth and their success as a designer. And I liked that. I liked being able to just influence things and not actually be directly responsible for things like performance reviews, or delivering critical feedback that people need to hear about themselves. I was totally fine just giving feedback on the work, and being sort of a support system for designers that might need to vent and or might need help in their work. But I was never directly responsible for them. And I thought that that was kind of the path that I would continue on, is just like I would be a contributor, and I would lead projects, and if there were other designers around me that were more junior, that I would help mentor them. um, what made me make the transition explicitly was that I saw that it was the only path to creating a healthier design team. I think that if a company says it values design, but it is lacking design leadership, it's not always the case that that's set up for failure or anything. It really depends on how that company operates and what the culture is. And I saw that at OP Labs, that there was this vacuum, and it was leading to issues around how other teams and non-design functions relate to design. Like, they would relate to design as, okay, design is this team that can make things look really nice, and they will draw the boxes that create the user flows and whatever. And of course, I think teams understand that that requires thought, but i I think that there was a gap in seeing that design was this superpower that can be applied across the whole company. And at the very low level, like, okay, here's a pretty button, and at the very high level, like, okay, how do we think about like collaboration and coordination across different teams, and how do we how does the design team make other functions successful by folding them into a methodology where we're anchoring on problems and then helping identify different ways to address that problem. So one of the things that I really enjoyed saying, because I think a lot of people understand, okay, design, product, and engineering as this like cross-functional team that they all are aligned on a shared goal and the final product. But you don't think I don't feel like people talk a lot about, like, okay, what about the design team and the people team, like designing an employee onboarding experience or internal swag. Like, all of that stuff can be really cool design cross-functional collaborations. um, and and I think when you don't have somebody that can like help direct teams on when it's useful to utilize design methodology and when you just need to execute and maybe you just need to be a service to other teams, then I think increasingly orgs will, I feel, I don't know if it's true, but my gut tells me that if you don't have somebody playing that role, then over time design just biases towards becoming a service, because that is ultimately what people will be measured on, right? Is by their output. And so yeah, that's like the broad strokes, not the detailed answer. But yeah, I wanted to play that role. I wanted to be the one saying, like, here's where we need to be more thoughtful and take a step back, and here's where we can just crank things out and execute without going through a whole design process, because it's not necessary, or it's not the most important priority.
Oh wow, Kathy, what you just said that just reminds me of the conversation we had a while ago. Like the similarities between the design team function and the data team function back in OP Labs. But yeah, we're not gonna
Mm,
get into more. We can talk about this like offline at work. We
sure.
talk a lot about work already, and I kind of wanna jump into another like conversation. How do you think you're different at work and outside of work? Maybe what are the things that excites you outside of work?
Mm. Yeah, because I was gonna say, I feel like my base personality and how I act and whatever, it's all the same. Especially at OP Labs, because Jane cusses a lot, and so I'm like, okay, this is fine. I'm gonna cuss a lot too, because that's just how I am. I'm just kidding. The I had a much more. I had a different answer when I was working at GitHub. Like what I'm interested in inside of work and outside of work. When I was at GitHub, I didn't have as much creative freedom at my job, because GitHub, thousands of employees. The product is super international, and it's a very mature product, so you're just not going to have that much room to do weird shit, because it's not your job. Your job is to follow a design system and continue to iterate on the existing brand and iterate on the existing product. Um, and so what I was interested in outside of work was a lot of things that would allow me to stretch myself creatively, and where I had a lot of creative freedom. So I was doing a lot of pottery at the time. Um, but since joining OP Labs, I think a lot of what I am interested in outside of work has shifted wildly, because because OP Labs is much newer and the brand is, still nascent, and a lot of the design foundations are not really built up yet, there's a lot of room for expression and creativity and exploration. You can really diverge. And so I'm not lacking a, 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 a space where I can be creative anymore. Like I can do that at my job, which is really cool. And it was part of the reason I was excited to join OP Labs was to be able to stretch myself that way. And recently as you know, I got to experience being a delegate for nouns, and I'm so interested in learning as much as I can about Web3, especially in ways that are more accessible to me, like being a delegate. Like the technological stuff is harder for me to grasp for sure. But I really love the governance aspects of Web3, and I really like learning more about DAOs and the different kinds of DAOs that exist. So it was just really cool for me to be invited to be a delegate for a month. And recently I got another delegation from Noun 40, so I'm getting to do this. So I'm still getting to do this. And so a lot of my free time is a lot of my free time is related to OP Labs and related to optimism. Even my little getting to experience the nouns community in this way, I view as just like this is a tangent to my job at OP Labs, because I'm doing this because I really want to learn. And also they're an Ethereum community, so it makes sense. Um, and yeah, my other hobbies are uh, like right now I'm playing a lot of poker on my phone because I'm doing so much for work. Like I'm pushing myself creatively. I'm learning how to be a manager for the first time. I'm growing a design team for the first time. I'm learning how to like invest in other people's success over my instead of the success of my own projects. I'm learning about healthy team dynamics. I'm learning how to like navigate so many things at OP Labs on top of I just get to stretch myself as a designer. And so my work life is like very rich. And so in my personal life, I'm just trying to chill now. So every night I smoke a ton of pot, and then I watch like poker streams, and then I play some poker. And then next month it'll be probably something different, because last month I was playing Splatoon like for 4 hours a night. I think right now it's just I game a lot. I really like having fun. I really like playing games. I really like playing games. Yeah.
We
So maybe
gotcha.
that's my broad interest outside of work.
Really like playing games. We'll make sure we note that. Related to kind of you saying that you have a rich work life and you just want to chill, you were talking a lot, especially when you were going over your earlier career, about burnout, about how
Mm,
you got burnout and then you, because of you care a lot. And I think it's a pretty relevant theme for a lot of people in Web3 or crypto, because people just care so much because this is their interest, their hobby, but at the same
mm,
time, it's really difficult. I think there's lots of studies showing it for human beings. You just like you just gotta chill. You gotta go touch some grass. You just can't work all the time. So I
yeah.
want to ask you, um, the Kathy nowadays, how do you avoid burnout? What is your approach when it comes to having this work life balance?
Mm, yeah. This is a really good topic, because I think I don't I wonder what burnout is like across different functions. I feel like my sense was that it was like very common in design, because design is like a lot of designers, they're in that job because they really give a shit about the things they make, right? Like that's kind of a thing you see across a lot of designers, is that they really care about their work, they really care about the quality of their work. And they also, I think most of them also want to work at a place where they generally vibe with directionally, or they care about the mission intensely. And so when you have that unique composition of a person working in an org where they don't actually control that organization and they don't own that organization, it can lead to situations where they burn out for various reasons. When I burned out, and I've only burned out one time, was at Patreon. And when I said I cared too much as the reason, I think that was the true reason. Um, I cared a lot without really knowing how to care productively. Like, and because I was also so young in my career, caring a lot translated to just working a ton and trying to do as much as I could all the time, and then being really frustrated when projects weren't successful or something that I thought was the right thing would not get on the roadmap. Etc. Right? Like, and then I ended up burning out because ultimately I didn't have control over a lot of these things, but I cared as though I had control, and I spent my time as though I could deeply influence things like prioritization, which at that time I could not. And so I burned out. And at GitHub, when I would talk to people who maybe were in a similar situation in terms of starting to feel like disconnected from their job because they're burning out, the reasons were a lot more varied. Like sometimes it's because you don't feel like you're being compensated appropriately. Sometimes it's you feel like you should be promoted and you're not getting it. Sometimes it's maybe you're just overworked. So there's like so many different reasons that somebody can burn out. And my advice, I think, for people generally would be I think you have to be really cognizant of what you're wanting and why. So understanding that first, and then be really cognizant of what is in your control versus what is not in your control. And once you know those two things, I think you ask yourself, are the things that I want possible here? And are the things that I want something that I can control? And I think depending on the answer to those questions, like you might need to change something. And I had a manager at GitHub that I think had a good view of this, which is not everyone can be happy at every job. Like GitHub is not going to be a job for everyone, and OP Labs is not going to be the right place for all people. It kind of depends. It really depends on what you value and if what you value is possible there. Um, and so yeah, I think that that would be my broad answer. I think that, if I was talking to somebody and I knew the specific thing they were unhappy about, my answer might be different. I think most commonly when I talk to people, the burnout factor is compensation, and like there's some disconnect between how they think they are being perceived or how they are being valued, and what the reality is. And I think that, whenever there's a gap between perception and reality for somebody, it's like it could be an issue. So yeah. But sometimes you might just have like worked way too much, and I would say, create boundaries and do some yoga. I'm trying to take my own advice right now on that and do some yoga.
I since you mentioned about like what people value the most when it comes to like burnout and stuff, I wonder, Kathy, what do you value in your life, and like what makes you feel happy and achieved?
mm. Hmm. I have a pretty good life.
Good.
I I don't know, my life is pretty good. I have no complaints. There's like everything about my life makes me happy. Like the fact that I get to work remotely makes me happy. I'm doing something that I'm interested in. Like that's very cool. I work with cool people, like good people. My partner is an incredible human and supports me like end to end on anything that I ever need help with. So, um that's great. I'm in good health. Weather in California is awesome. There's so many things that make me happy. I think that like as long as I can as long as I can have fun and make things, um, considering that all the other basic needs are satisfied, I'll probably be good. Um, I've only become unhappy when, like I said, like the way that the way that I felt was not like the same as what I was perceiving in reality, like, around whether I'm being acknowledged the way that I want to, or whether I'm getting to have the impact that I want to. But those usually also only happen in the context of my job. So,
Yeah, but I guess is it I wonder because different people might value different things in life, but it seems like you've kind of having them right now with you, which is great. Um, but do you think is because you already know those are the things that you value, or is it
mm,
because yeah, like basically maybe some people they what they want is like way up there, so that's why they're like, oh, I gotta do something to achieve it. But what you want is like, oh, I treasure what I have now. So yeah.
yeah, you know, yeah, that's a good question. What I thought I wanted when I was younger is probably different than what things are now. And there are things that I couldn't have known that I wanted that I know are important to me now. Like, for example, when I was in my early 20s, I was like, I must make a lot of money. I must live in San Francisco. I was on a different podcast like about design careers and whatever. Uh, and I was revisiting this memory with my friend who was interviewing me, and I had told him, like, for when I decided I wanted to pursue design, I had this goal of what success looked like. And to me, success meant I was living in San Francisco, working at some like tech company and making six figures. And then maybe at some point I will be a senior designer. Like those were just very like basic and clear, measurable goals. And when I got there, I was like, oh, okay, well, I don't have more goals. Like that's as far as I envisioned. um, and and I didn't really think about what my next set of things were. So that's like in the context of my job. But I think I can say that about my life too. It's like, oh, I wanted to live in this place. I wanted to have this kind of stability. I wanted to have a boyfriend. um, and then when you get there, you're just like, oh, well, it's not the end of your life, so you should probably have other things that you are thinking about. And I think that in my late 20s, I got to the place where I really started to understand what I valued. And I also feel like I became who I was. I don't feel like I was a complete person yet when I was 25. I think I became my complete person a couple years later. And now the things that are important to me, I don't think I would have given the same answer when I was younger, in my mid 20s or late 20s even. But the things important to me now are I I get to be proud of the way I spend my time. Um, my physical health is like way more important to me now. Like when you sit on your ass for 8 hours a day, or you play like Age of Empires for 40 hours a week and get carpal tunnel, you're just like, oh, the body is frail and you must take care of it. So that's something that was new. But maybe the thing that became most important to me, that was always important to me, but I think important to me in a very different way now, are my relationships with people. um I think the number one thing in my life is my relationship with my partner. Like that's absolutely the most important thing. And then it's my friends and family, and I invest in those things differently now. And yeah, I think like a lot of my 20s was very career oriented and very like personal growth oriented, and now I'm like, well, now I know stuff and I can contribute stuff, so I'm a little, and you can kind of see that in my career path, right? Like I'm becoming a manager, and um supporting other people. And recently, a friend of mine, like he started running this community event in San Francisco called Demos and Chill, and that's something that makes me very happy, just to like be able to help with an event where people come together and share their side projects and have a creative community. That's made me incredibly happy. And so, yeah, okay, this was like a very ADHD answer. My relationships, um, my freedom to create, and being able to feel proud of how I spend my time, because I don't think I care about the final outcome as much as just I want to feel good about where I'm putting my time, because that's the thing that keeps moving forward, right?
Yeah, I think I definitely resonate with that journey about when you're younger, in your early 20s or even late teens, like you have these goals, whether that's given or influenced upon you by your parents or by the society and the groups around you, about these like six figure, about like getting a promotion, moving to a city. It's very concrete goal, but at the same time, like you said, once you reach them, past them, you get happy and fulfilled for like a day or two, or maybe just a couple hours, and then you're just like, what now? So it's very wholesome actually to hear you also share, and I definitely resonate with that a lot. As I get older, you realize it's really a journey and the process, and not really about a destination. And definitely, like, I used to hear people say about their physical health. But as you get older, you realize you actually do start investing in those things. And same thing with relationships. And maybe it's because you have the confidence, from the experience from all those years. You're like, okay, now I feel pretty secure in my craft. I feel pretty secure in my framework and approach life, such that I can treat spend more effort and treat relationship more like a bigger portion of my time spent. And I really like how you say you feel proud of how you spent your time. That's I think that's something that's gonna stick with me. Stick with me for a while. I like that as a goal in life.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Oh, Kathy,
yeah,
go ahead.
yeah. I was gonna say, yeah, you know, those like very discrete line item goals. You're right. Like, I think once you get there, I don't feel that it was the true marker of success, because I don't think it was something that I created internally, right? It was something that society reflected to me, or I saw somebody else have, and I was like, I want that too. That to me looks like what success looks like. And then you get it and you're like, "Oh, it didn't feel super special." I mean, it did feel really good to finally get a promotion that I really wanted. But yeah, after that point, you're just like, uh, you start needing to do some work to define what you really care about and what would make you happy. And I think that yeah, I think that I feel like a lot of people that I've talked to who've had a longer career in tech and has had that arc where they sort of are like passionate, bushy tailed, bright eyed, and then like maybe they have like a burnout event and they then sort of struggle with like, do I even like this job? And then you get to redefine, you know, what that means to you and what makes you happy.
Yeah, I just couldn't stop like smiling when hearing your answers. That's also sort of what I was expecting, because I think you've already like, oh yeah, reached that craft and you're comfortable at your current level. And I, well, just based on like how I learned about you, I think you are that type of person who will be like, yes, I'm happy and content. So I was sort of like expecting Kathy to answer that, but that resonates with me as well. I wouldn't say like, oh, I feel like my craft is already there or something, but also at the same time, I was telling my friend the other day, and probably also mentioned to Jackie before that, that when they ask me like, oh, what's your goal in life and stuff, I'm just, I what I told them is just I want to have a balanced life. Not like anyone can, I wouldn't imagine this as a triangle, but what you were saying just now, like Kathy, is like your relationship, your work, and then your physical health. I think that's like, if you can have a balanced triangle of that and keep this kind of like stable state, then I don't know, I'll feel happy. And it sounds like you feel happy too. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that answer because I think balance is my goal. Like I don't want to like yeah, when you're young, and Jackie, you mentioned this too, which I liked, and I know it was true for me too. Like I just didn't have much self-esteem, like both as a person and then especially as a designer. I just lacked self-esteem and confidence, and it took me many years to get to a point where I was both comfortable with who I was and liked who I was, and then also felt comfortable saying, I'm a designer, and I knew exactly where I stood and what I was good at and what I wasn't so good at and needed to improve in. Once I felt like I knew all of that and had internalized all that and also felt fine with it, I think that's when I was able to create my own definitions of what my own happiness is driven by. And um, and now that I am in that place, I think balance is the goal. It's like incredibly hard to achieve like great balance, I think, when you are at a job where it's one of those very passion driven jobs, especially early stage startups can be that way. Um, and yeah, even in like the first couple months of my job at OP Labs, like I was seeing, and it's still to some degree true at this point, like I'm spending a lot of time with my work, and it's significantly more time than I was spending when I was at GitHub, or even I would say Patreon. Like it's like the hardest I've ever worked. And so I'm trying like right now to pull back actually, because I'm like, oh, the other stuff is withering. um, and so yeah, I need to like make a correction in the way that I uh, the way that I allocate my time to the different aspects of my life. But that's life also. Sometimes you will be uh, putting a lot more in one area because it needs it at that time, and hopefully you have the support system around you that like allows that and supports you doing that.
In the interest of time, I think we'll be come to a closing. So, Kathy, where can people learn more about you?
Oh, I was gonna say Twitter, but they changed their name to X, and now I'm just like, I feel so awkward saying it each time. I have a website called pifafu.com. You can go learn more about me there.
And what do you want to learn from our listeners? How can they help you?
Mm, not something that I'm learning, but maybe just a request is just I think if you can add beauty to this reality and keep improving yourself to do so, then you're living a good life. Well, this was fun,
Yeah.
y'all. Thank you for having me on.
Thank
Yeah,
you
yeah,
for
yeah. I just
coming.
keep
Oh.
learning. I just keep learning more about you. I think last time in Mexico, we just learned more about all this like Japanese anime and culture and stuff, and now just digging more into the designer life, which I really enjoyed. Yeah. Thank you,
Yeah.
Kathy.
Thank you. It's
Well,
so
yeah.
cool to learn everything about like your journey, your path, and yeah, I say this all the time, but like how similar people are and how different people are. Really, like every episode, I feel the same way.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I can't wait. I'm going to listen maybe to some of your earlier episodes. And yeah, thanks for inviting me. It was really nice to meet you, Jackie. And I'll
Nice to meet
see
you
you
too.
online.
Yes,
Bye.
yes,
Enjoy
bye.
your weekend. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Journey of the Unordinary. If you haven't already, please subscribe so you won't miss an episode. You can find us on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you are listening right now. Also, if you know someone who might enjoy the podcast, please share it. If you like our conversation, please help rate it and give us a review so others can discover the podcast and join us on the same adventures.
Join us next time as we carry out intimate conversations with our unordinary guests to discover their journeys to where they are today. See you next week!